I'm a big fan of the Kung Fu Panda series, and with Kung Fu Panda 4 just around the corner, it's getting a lot of talk, specifically about its usage of Tai Lung, the villain from the original movie 16 years ago? Oh god, that is different. Anyway, existential dread aside, it gives me the perfect opportunity to talk about one of my favourite personal tropes when it comes to storytelling, the return of a villain. Well, okay, personal favourite is maybe a stretch. One that I'm very emotional about? Maybe. Because I absolutely adore them when they're done right, and hate them when they're done wrong. So let's talk about the best of the best, and also the, not that. And hey, perhaps you're looking for the right way to bring back a baddie in the story that you're writing, so this video can count as educational. The first thing that makes this trope work so well, what it does in my eyes? Dynamics. There's always going to be one big question when you bring back an old antagonist, and that question is, why? And my answer, why, besides why not, is more often than not going to be dynamics. I'm going to use two big examples here, Lord Frieza and Dio Brando, arguably the two most famous villains in all of anime, with the sole exception of Team Rocket. Now, these two work as excellent comparisons because of what we're focusing on right now. Their grand returns are to very different crowds. When Dio comes back in part 3, he's got a snazzy new power set, a new fit, a new name. Yeah, can someone tell me why Stardust Crusaders and Beyond Dio is spelled with all caps? But most importantly, every single person who knew him in part 1 is dead or irrelevant or both. He's going up against an entirely new cast, who only knew about him from the legends being told. It's not a bad way to do it, and I'll talk more about the positives and negatives in a sec, but I admit I do prefer the Frieza way. Look, Resurrection F is not a good movie. In fact, I think it deserves a lot more flack than it gets, and it gets a decent amount. This is the point where I'd say, maybe I'll do a video on it someday, but I'm not gonna lie, I don't think I could fight off the Toei copyright ninjas for long. They took down my Jiren video when it had like 700 views.
Get back, you savages! Sorry!
But the part I think both it and the Tournament of Power gets almost perfect is the actual revival of the villain. And a huge part of that is his dynamic with the heroes, in particular Goku. See, counting non-canon stuff, Frieza has returned a stupid amount of times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fucking times, good lord! But Resurrection F was where they finally cracked it. Not just because they actually gave him the spotlight, seriously guys, if you're going to resurrect one of the biggest antagonists in anime, don't just make them an afterthought, okay? Please, please, please! But also because of his relationship with Goku. Before, his previous revivals were some really generic villain talk, with the only flashes of interest being straight up trauma of the Super Saiyan. But now, the story knows that the most interest to be found is with the relationship of him and the carefree Saiyan that killed him. Despite what a lot of Dragon Ball fans might tell you, I'd say his dynamic with Goku is a lot stronger than any he might have with Vegeta. The two of them mirror each other perfectly, Frieza's obsession with respect and power and control, with Goku's ultimately carefree and go with the wind attitude. And you can see that after death, this has been burrowing deep into his mind, and by the time he's returned he's practically obsessed with the Saiyan. Not to the point of damaging his character, but to the point where the dynamic established in the Namek saga has gradually, naturally evolved to this pseudo-hatred, pseudo-respect for the other. Being uneasy allies for a while doesn't hurt either. Meanwhile, on the end of Dio, there's nobody for him to evolve his dichotomy with. Combined with his change in personality and even powers, and I can see why a lot of people say he feels like a different character by the time part 3 rolls around. It also doesn't help that a lot of the time he's in the shadows until the very end of the arc. Honestly, and I'm saying this as a big fan of Dio, Part 3 and JoJo in general, it's definitely on the lower end of quality villain resurrections we're talking about today, held up by the final battle of Part 3 being genuinely excellent. I could even call it the worst villain resurrection we're talking about today, but except it's not. Oh, we will get to the worst. But first, let's talk about character. I've spoken briefly about how character can be improved with the return of a big bad. Frieza went from nothing but a pure evil space conqueror. Don't get me wrong, a really well done pure evil space conqueror, to having a strange and wonderful, let's call it a situationship, with Goku and Vegeta, even able to show off his cunning and devious personality to others that weren't part of the main cast. Now, I was going to exclude villains that get redeemed for this, but if I did that, then I just wouldn't be able to speak about one of my favourites of all time when it comes to revivals, and I just couldn't leave out Captain Hector Barbossa. Jeffrey Rush played a truly wonderful pirate captain, no, not that one, he's just peak, in Black Pearl, and I'm sure the world would have kept on turning just fine if that was the last we'd seen of him. But him being able to return to the trilogy, and yes, we're just keeping it to the trilogy here, let's not get crazy, gives him a genuinely scene-stealing relationship with Jack Sparrow, leading to some of the best moments of the franchise, and him not having to act as a primary lead, he's allowed to stretch his acting wings a little bit more with the whole rest of the cast. In my opinion, the actor and the character is the glue that holds the wedding during a fight scene together. Without Barbossa, I genuinely think it would have come off as far too hokey and shark jumpy, but he's able to embrace it wholeheartedly. And, well, I wouldn't say the scene is perfect, but it adds to his character, giving him more depth without going to a full-on redemption. The Pirate series isn't what you'd call morally grey, but in a franchise where so many characters are on their own side in the best of ways, always changing allegiances, he's a perfect piece of the puzzle that even makes sense to bring back narratively. God, I need to do a Pirates of the Caribbean video sometime. And again, there's 4 and 5, but for the sake of this video's length, we are going to glance over them for now. Star Wars. Yeah, okay, it's not exactly an aspect of the villain return trope per se, but I just needed to talk about this series when it comes to revivals because it's so frustrating. Because this series contains one of my all-time favourite villain resurrections, and perhaps the worst one that I've seen in media. Darth Maul and Emperor Palpatine should, by definition, have the exact same problems. They're both antagonists that really should not have survived the last time we saw them, with the whole being cut in half and dropped down a 100-metre shaft or exploded. And more than that, they had served their purpose in the story. However, I do think there's something to be said for Palpatine's return. Whether it was actually meant by the filmmakers is another question entirely, but I do think it was required after what had been set up in the last 2 films. After all, without him being the puppet master of Snoke and the First Order, it's pretty empty to think that you can have this prophecy about the defeat of a Dark Lord, the rising of a hero to save his family, and just a few decades later, much less if you count the Stormtrooper indoctrination, it can all happen again, even worse this time. Making Palpatine the dark figurehead behind this can almost work, because when he's defeated this time for good, you've got to make sure it's for good, it can at least dispel the idea of this cycle happening once more. That is what I would say if it felt like he was actually defeated for good. Because when you bring a villain back, you've got to reap what you sow. You have to explain how they got back, and you have to make sure to convince the audience they're gone for good if you decide to off them again. I'd say this was done well with every other character mentioned so far. Maul died peacefully in his enemy's arms. Dio's body burnt in the sun in front of us. Frieza is literally still out there. But Palpatine, not only does this movie refuse to explain the actual methods of survival, you could say Maul does the same, but at the very least it makes a big deal out of his return and gives some of the hardest lines of the series in my opinion for it. For Palpatine, I mean, I just play the clip.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
That, yes. is pretty easily accepted in universe, and worse, there's all this talk about how he'll be reborn into Rey if she kills him, and she does exactly that. Genuinely, I don't get this at all. Is it because she reflects his lightning at him? How is it any different to say the lightning kills him versus her lightsaber kills him? Look, all I'm saying is if the Rey movie is about her fighting off the spirit of Pruny Sheev, I'll be a happy chappy. I know it won't be, okay, I know it won't be, let me dream. Let me dream that mainstream Star Wars can be good. Meanwhile, on the other hand, we have Maul, who is, well, remember the section earlier where I spoke about how a villain can be improved upon returning from certain death through strengthening their character? Darth friggin' Maul is perhaps the ultimate example of that. In The Phantom Menace, he was cool, undeniably so. Even the biggest prequel haters at the time could admit Maul was fucking awesome, and gave us one of the single best fight scenes in the entire franchise. But he wasn't really much of a character. He was a cold-blooded Sith assassin that could fight in a really cool way, and that was the extent of it. And then the Clone Wars happened, and he got to show off everything else. Once a silent fighter, now he gets to show off his manipulation and planning skills. Now he gets to show off a very different side through interactions with his brother, with Ahsoka, with Ezra, even with Palpatine himself when he appears in a genuinely incredible battle. Going from an awesome but one-note fighter to a multi-layered character who can be a clever, compromising mentor figure, a leader with his own goals and aspirations, and still an awesome fighter. Compare all that to how Palpatine's character was explored in Rise of Skywalker. It wasn't. Like, by this point, Rey has been searching for her family for 2.5 movies, and when she finally gets to meet the last surviving member of her bloodline and he meets her, he gives a dark, generic speech, which, with like 3 words changed, could easily be referring to Luke or Anakin. And it's extremely disappointing, but, well, that's kind of the bread and butter of the Star Wars sequels, so what are you gonna do? It's not like I was surprised. So the moral of the story is, if you're going to bring back a big, important villain, you've got to ask yourself why. Is it going to let you explore the heroes and who they are? Is it going to develop the villain themselves and allow the viewer to further understand what makes them tick? If not, well, maybe you should consider something original. What's your favourite example of a big bad villain return? Please let me know in the comments down below. Hope you're all enjoying my return. Please like and subscribe. Talk to you soon. More videos on the way, just you wait.